Why is it that women today, despite more rights, more representation, more freedom, are reporting higher rates of anxiety, burnout, and dissatisfaction than ever before? That's not just ironic, that's a sign. Something is broken, and I believe we need to talk about it, not with anger, not with outrage, but with clarity and responsibility. When feminism first emerged as a revolutionary force, it carried a promise that electrified the world: the empowerment of women. It offered a vision of equality, freedom, and opportunity. It declared that women could rise beyond the confines of tradition, shake off the weight of social expectation, and finally live life on their own terms. And for many, it delivered just that. Women entered boardrooms, led nations, earned degrees, launched businesses, and reshaped industries. They broke barriers that had long held them back. And yet, for all these gains, for all the victories and milestones and laws changed in their favor, a strange and deeply troubling reality has begun to emerge. Many women, especially in modern, developed societies, are not feeling more empowered. They are feeling exhausted, not invigorated but depleted, not free but burdened. And the question that needs to be asked, without fear, without defensiveness, is why? We have to understand that empowerment in its truest form is not just about access or opportunity. It's not simply about the right to do something. Real empowerment is about capacity, the energy, clarity, and space to actually exercise one's choices in a way that aligns with their values, their identity, and their sense of purpose. What feminism did, with good intent, was open up the field of options. Women could now be leaders, soldiers, engineers, surgeons, CEOs. They could choose ambition, but over time, society didn't just allow them to choose it, we started to expect it from them. And in doing so, we quietly replaced one set of rules with another. We moved from "you must stay home" to "you must chase success," from "you should be a mother" to "you should be an achiever." In the name of freedom, we created a new formula for worth, one that often looked strikingly similar to the one we once rejected. And this new formula, though dressed in the language of liberation, has created a generation of women who are carrying a silent weight. Because now, to be seen as valuable, many women feel they must be excellent in every domain, not just at work, but also at home, not just as professionals, but also as partners, friends, daughters, and mothers. They must be financially independent, emotionally intelligent, physically fit, intellectually sharp, socially conscious, constantly evolving, endlessly resilient, and always available to everyone who needs them. It is the expectation of total excellence, and no human being, no matter how brilliant, no matter how driven, can sustain that without burning out. So what was once offered as a gift, the ability to choose, has in some cases become a trap. The freedom to choose has become the pressure to perform. This is where the misunderstanding lies. Somewhere along the way, feminism began to absorb the very same metrics of success that were once used to limit women. In our drive to prove equality, we began to define worth through output, through status, through title, through the ability to do more. Feminism, once a call to be more, subtly transformed into a call to achieve more. And when you constantly tell people, explicitly or implicitly, that they must hustle harder, lean in more, climb faster, and show up stronger, what you're really teaching them is that rest, softness, contemplation, or simply being is not enough. The message becomes, if you are not striving, you are slipping. If you are not ascending, you are irrelevant. And for many women, this internalized message, combined with an already demanding world, has created an unsustainable loop of exhaustion. The truth is, feminism promised empowerment, but empowerment cannot survive in an environment of relentless performance. Empowerment cannot coexist with perfectionism, and empowerment certainly cannot flourish where choice has been replaced by obligation. What too many women are experiencing today is not a liberation of identity, but a fragmentation of self. They are not choosing from a place of joy. They are performing from a place of fear, fear of judgment, of not measuring up, of being seen as weak or unambitious, or, worst of all, unworthy. It is no longer enough to have the freedom to pursue a career. Now, you must excel at it. It is no longer enough to have a family. Now, you must balance it perfectly with your professional life. And in the background of all this, social media acts as a constant scoreboard, measuring how gracefully you juggle it all. There's a haunting irony here. The very movement that sought to break chains has, in some cases, simply replaced them with newer, shinier ones. And we don't talk about this enough because to question feminism feels taboo. But this isn't a rejection of its ideals. It's a call to return to them. Because if women are feeling more pressure, more anxiety, and less peace in a world that claims to have empowered them, we cannot ignore that. We must ask ourselves hard questions, not because we failed, but because we care enough to get it right. Somewhere along the line, we made a cultural pivot, a subtle but profound shift in how we assign value to people. In the past, your worth might have been tied to your family name, your moral standing, your role in the community, or the kind of person you were. It was flawed, yes, it excluded many, but it also operated on a more human scale. Today, in contrast, we live in a culture that places extraordinary emphasis on what you do rather than who you are. Your vocation, your job title, your income, your LinkedIn bio has become the primary lens through which society measures your worth. And this shift, while seemingly neutral or even progressive on the surface, has carried unintended consequences, especially for women. As women gained access to spaces traditionally reserved for men, corporate offices, boardrooms, courtrooms, labs, startups, the intention was clear: to expand their opportunity. But over time, this expansion was accompanied by a subtle message that the more closely women mirrored the productivity-focused, status-driven behaviors of traditional success, the more legitimate and respected they would be. So, in seeking equality, we often asked women to conform to male-coded systems of value where achievement is measured by output, influence, and hustle. And this is where the problem began to grow. Because what started as opportunity has gradually evolved into pressure. Pressure to define oneself through a job, to tether identity to a paycheck, and to equate self-worth with professional accomplishment. We see it everywhere, but we rarely name it. It's the reason why asking someone, "What do you do?" has become the first question in most social conversations. It's the reason resumes and bios are treated as proxies for character. And it's the reason why so many women today feel they are only as valuable as their latest promotion, their productivity levels, or the number of hours they've worked this week. This narrative doesn't leave room for rest, reflection, or alternative paths. It doesn't honor care work, emotional labor, or creative exploration that isn't monetized. It doesn't validate the choice to pause, to change course, or to prioritize life over labor. It narrows the spectrum of worth to a singular dimension: professional success. For women, this dynamic has created a unique kind of conflict. Many were told they could be anything, which is powerful, but they were also told, implicitly, that choosing anything less than everything might mean they are wasting their potential. So the message isn't just that career matters. It's that career is central to your identity. It's the main character in your story. And if you're not relentlessly pursuing it, if you're not scaling, building, earning, or influencing, then maybe you're not really living up to the promise of empowerment. And this is the trap. Because in trying to liberate women from the confines of domestic expectation, we have sometimes walked them into a different kind of box, one where value is conditional on ambition, on constant motion, on visible achievement. This is especially noticeable when women choose alternative paths that don't fit the modern professional mold. A woman who chooses to be a full-time caregiver is often met with subtle condescension, as if she has opted out of relevance. A woman who steps back from her career to prioritize her mental health or raise children is asked, "When are you going back to work?" As though the work she's doing is somehow not enough. And even among highly successful women, there is an invisible script that says, your work must keep growing. You must keep proving. Because if you stop, you risk becoming invisible. This is not freedom. This is another kind of performance. And at its core, this performance is rooted in a flawed belief that a person's value is external, that it must be seen, quantified, endorsed, rewarded. But value is not just economic. It is not just vocational. A woman's ability to nurture, to lead with empathy, to create a safe home, to care for aging parents, to bring people together, to listen deeply, to teach, to mentor, to heal. These are profoundly valuable contributions, but because they often happen outside of spreadsheets, titles, and job descriptions, they are often overlooked. The market doesn't pay for them, so society doesn't highlight them. And in the absence of that external recognition, women may begin to internalize the idea that their most human, generous, and life-giving roles are somehow less legitimate. The most ironic part is that this narrative, this glorification of vocation, isn't even working well for men. It has long asked men to tie their self-worth to their jobs, creating decades of burnout and emotional suppression. And now, as women step into that same mold, we are starting to see history repeat itself, but this time under the banner of empowerment. It's time to ask, what are we really empowering women to do? To be endlessly productive? To never pause? To validate themselves only through career milestones? Or are we empowering them to define their own value on their own terms? There is something beautiful and deeply human about collaboration. It is how families survive, how communities grow, how movements are born. When we come together, when we listen, share, support, and stand shoulder to shoulder, we don't just divide burdens, we multiply strength. Yet today, we are living in a cultural moment that too often confuses success with scarcity. A moment where women, in particular, are being asked, sometimes subtly, sometimes blatantly, to compete, outperform, and prove themselves not only to men, but increasingly to each other. And the cost of this quiet war of comparison, status, and perfection is not only the loss of connection, it's the erosion of the very foundation that once made feminist progress possible, solidarity. The early stages of the women's movement were built on the idea that progress for one woman meant progress for all. It was less about hierarchy and more about hand-holding. It wasn't about stepping over each other, it was about pulling each other forward. But in today's hyper-individualistic culture, where social media constantly broadcasts curated lives and where professional spaces reward singular excellence over collective growth, the script has changed. Now, too many women are taught, intentionally or not, that in order to stand out, they must stand alone. That to lead, they must edge out the others. That success is only real if it's exclusive, if it puts them ahead of someone else. This mindset starts early. From school age, girls are praised for being top of the class, best in the room, most outstanding. It continues in college, where leadership is often associated with domination of space. How loudly you speak, how quickly you respond, how confidently you assert your ideas. And then it follows into adulthood, where the marketplace operates like a scoreboard. Every woman is invited into the game, but reminded there are limited seats at the table. So, rather than expanding the table, we find ourselves fighting over the chairs. The corporate world says it's empowering women by giving them more opportunities, but it's doing so within a structure that still pits them against each other. Promotions are scarce, leadership spots fewer, and recognition even more selective. And when the system incentivizes competition, even the most well-meaning individuals are nudged to view peers not as teammates, but as threats. And this competition isn't always obvious. Sometimes it looks like comparison. Watching another woman's life unfold on Instagram and wondering why yours doesn't look as polished. Sometimes it looks like self-doubt, feeling less worthy simply because someone else seems to be winning. Sometimes it looks like distance, avoiding deep friendships with other women, because somewhere deep down you've internalized the message that closeness equals vulnerability and vulnerability equals weakness. The tragedy is that all of this not only isolates women from one another, but also from themselves. When your value is measured against someone else's highlight reel, you lose sight of your own journey. What's often overlooked is how unnatural this is. Women, historically and biologically, have thrived in cooperation. They have nurtured, led, built communities, raised children together, supported one another through grief, transition, and transformation. These were never solo acts. They were collective, sacred, and powerful. In fact, some of the most transformative social movements, including the women's rights movement itself, were only possible because women trusted each other, worked together, and saw their stories reflected in one another. But today, that same community-oriented power has been diluted by a narrative that tells women to be stronger than the other, not stronger with each other. It's subtle, but it's everywhere. It's in the praise of the girl boss who makes it to the top alone. It's in the applause for the woman who did it all without help. It's in the marketing that tells you to be a queen, but only if there's a throne to sit on, and only if it's yours alone. And in this paradigm, real connection becomes collateral damage. Vulnerability becomes rare. Mentorship becomes transactional. Friendships become shallow, limited by the unspoken fear that someone else's success might somehow eclipse your own. And this is where we begin to lose something sacred. Because the truth is, competition, when it's rooted in fear, breeds insecurity. It breeds isolation. It breeds the need to prove instead of the freedom to grow. And when women are locked in cycles of quiet competition, there's less space for shared learning, for mentorship, for the kind of empathy that says, I see you, not I'm better than you. We talk about empowering women, but empowerment cannot happen in silos. Power grows when it's shared, and the kind of leadership the world desperately needs today is not leadership that shines alone, but leadership that shines a light on others. There's a natural impulse, when you've been held back for a long time, to push forward as hard and fast as possible the moment the restraint is lifted. It's an understandable instinct, to reclaim what was denied, to prove your strength, to rewrite the narrative. And for women who for centuries were limited, silenced, underestimated, and boxed in, that push made sense. Feminism didn't just open doors, it broke locks. It challenged systems, redefined laws, shifted norms. It told women, rightly, that they could be more, do more, expect more. But in that noble effort to overcorrect centuries of inequality, something unintended happened. In our collective drive to escape oppression, we've built a new kind of pressure. A pressure that doesn't come from patriarchy, but from within the very movement that promised to set women free. And now, many women aren't just fighting to be seen. They're fighting to keep up with an ever-growing list of expectations that never seems to end. We used to tell women what they couldn't do. Now we tell them what they must do. You must be independent. You must be ambitious. You must be strong at all times, emotionally self-sufficient, professionally driven, physically attractive, socially conscious, constantly evolving. The language has changed from you belong in the kitchen to you belong in the corner office, but the pressure is still there. We went from saying, you have no voice, to your voice better be heard, loud and clear all the time. In trying to eliminate the ceilings, we've unintentionally raised the floors. There's no longer room for hesitation, no space for ambivalence, no tolerance for wanting something different. The woman who chooses simplicity, who values home over hustle, who finds fulfillment outside of achievement, is now at risk of being seen not as free, but as regressive. This is the silent contradiction of modern empowerment. What began as a movement for freedom has, in some circles, become a prescription for performance. The old rules said, be quiet. The new rules say, speak up, but only if your message aligns with the dominant narrative. The old rules said, follow. The new ones say, lead, but make it look effortless, polished, and graceful. The problem is not that we expect too much of women. It's that we've started expecting everything all at once, not just excellence, but excellence across every category: professional brilliance, domestic elegance, emotional intelligence, social relevance, aesthetic perfection, and moral authority, and all of it, ideally, achieved simultaneously, with no signs of struggle or sacrifice. This kind of expectation isn't just unrealistic, it's exhausting. It's left many women silently overwhelmed, because while the world applauds the empowered woman, very few people are asking what it costs her to wear that title. Very few are acknowledging the fatigue that comes with constantly needing to prove she belongs, that she's enough, that she's not just empowered, but exceptional. Empowerment, at its core, should be about choice, about autonomy, about the ability to define success on your own terms. But when empowerment starts sounding like obligation, it loses its meaning. When it becomes a checklist, it stops being liberating and starts becoming oppressive in a different uniform. We've created a culture where wanting less is viewed as lacking ambition, where pausing is seen as weakness, where stepping back is interpreted as failure. But who decided that striving is the only worthy posture? Who defined empowerment as constant motion? This new expectation, born from a well-meaning overcorrection, has started to shape the very way women see themselves. It creates internal conflict. You can see it in the woman who has a fulfilling job, but feels guilty for not having a side hustle. You see it in the mother who cherishes time with her children, but feels compelled to prove that she's still driven. You see it in the entrepreneur who built something meaningful, but constantly compares herself to someone doing more, achieving faster, scaling bigger. And what's most disorienting is that this pressure no longer comes solely from the outside. It has been internalized. Many women now police themselves with the very expectations they once fought against. They carry guilt for resting, shame for slowing down, and a constant sense that they are behind some imaginary standard of excellence. This isn't freedom. This is a burden masquerading as empowerment. And yet, because it's dressed in the language of progress, it's harder to name, harder to resist. The woman who admits she doesn't want to climb the ladder, or who says she's content with a quieter life, risks being viewed as betraying the cause. But the cause was never about uniformity. It was about agency. And agency means having the freedom to choose without penalty, to define fulfillment without needing to explain or justify it to anyone. For too long, we've defined success through a narrow, singular lens, one that values dominance over empathy, speed over depth, control over connection. This lens, forged in centuries of male-dominated power structures, has shaped how we measure worth, assign value, and determine who gets to lead. It's a model built on hierarchy, conquest, linear growth, and zero-sum thinking. You win or you lose. You lead or you follow. You scale or you stagnate. And it's so deeply embedded in our institutions, our language, and even our daily habits that we rarely pause to question it. But if we want a more human, inclusive, and sustainable future, not just for women but for everyone, we have to recognize that this model of success isn't the only way. It's just the most familiar one. The masculine archetype of success, what we reward, promote, and glorify, prioritizes visibility, authority, and constant upward momentum. It celebrates the CEO who works 80-hour weeks, the entrepreneur who never sleeps, the leader who makes the tough decisions without blinking. It admires confidence, often at the expense of humility. It reveres decisiveness, even when it's detached from wisdom. And perhaps most pervasively, it teaches us that vulnerability is a liability, that to show uncertainty or softness is to show weakness. When women entered the workforce en masse, they didn't just step into new roles, they stepped into this old paradigm. And in order to be taken seriously, many felt the pressure to adopt its rules, to speak louder, fight harder, be sharper, tougher, quicker. Because that's what success looked like. That's what leadership looked like. And yet, here lies the quiet tragedy. In trying to earn a seat at the table, women have often been asked to leave parts of themselves behind, not because those parts are flawed, but because they don't fit the mold. Emotional intelligence, relational leadership, intuition, collaborative decision-making, resilience rooted in care. These are qualities that have historically been coded as feminine and therefore undervalued. But they are not soft skills. They are not secondary traits. They are critical strengths, especially in a world that is increasingly interconnected, complex, and in need of healing, not just progress. The issue isn't that women don't belong at the top. The issue is that the top was built to reward a narrow set of behaviors, and any deviation from them is still seen as lesser. When we tell women they can be anything, but only if they mimic the traditional male playbook, that's not empowerment, that's assimilation. It's survival, and survival is not the same as thriving. What we need is a redefinition of success, one that doesn't require women to mold themselves into outdated frames, but invites them to reshape the frame entirely. Imagine leadership that values listening as much as it values speaking. That measures impact not only by revenue, but by well-being. That rewards teams not only for performance metrics, but for how they treat each other. Imagine success that allows for seasons of life, where stepping back is not punished, where caretaking is not a detour, where balance is not a buzzword, but a legitimate, supported path. This isn't about replacing one model with another. It's not about flipping the script so that only feminine traits are celebrated. It's about integration. It's about allowing people, especially women, to show up fully with their full range of intelligence, strength, sensitivity, ambition, and heart, without being forced to wear a mask. We often say diversity matters, but true diversity is not just about who's in the room. It's about what ways of thinking and leading are allowed to flourish once they're there. If we bring more women into leadership, but still expect them to act like the men before them, have we really changed anything? We are at a point in our cultural evolution where we can no longer afford one-dimensional definitions of success. Our challenges as a society, climate, inequality, mental health, technological ethics, require leaders who think long-term, who center humanity, who know how to build trust. And many women bring these strengths naturally, not because they're biologically predetermined, but because their lived experiences have often demanded deeper empathy, greater flexibility, and a stronger sense of community. These are assets, not afterthoughts, but we can't unlock them unless we're willing to challenge the assumption that the highest form of achievement is always loud, fast, and forceful. There is enormous courage in being different in a system that rewards conformity. There is power in choosing to lead with softness, in resisting the urge to compete when collaboration is more needed, in redefining ambition not as domination, but as contribution. When women are allowed to lead in ways that feel authentic rather than performative, everyone benefits, not just other women, but entire teams, companies, families, and cultures. Because we're not just building careers, we're building lives. And the world doesn't need more polished resumes. It needs more whole, integrated, self-aware human beings who know that success isn't a title or a bank balance, but the ability to show up fully without apology or pretense. True freedom isn't about having it all. It's about having the right to choose what enough means for you. It's not about climbing every ladder, winning every title, or ticking off every socially accepted milestone. It's about being able to step back and ask yourself honestly, what do I actually want? And then, to choose that, without fear, without shame, and most importantly, without judgment from the world around you. Because when we say we want to empower women, what we should mean is, we want to make space for all paths, not just the ones that fit a particular narrative of progress or power. But too often, the freedom feminism fought for has been replaced by a silent pressure to perform, to succeed in ways that look impressive, ambitious, or modern, even when they don't feel authentic. And that subtle shift, from choice to expectation, has left many women feeling like they have the right to move forward, but not the permission to slow down or pivot sideways. What makes this so insidious is that it hides behind the language of empowerment. We say we support all women, but we still project value onto certain choices. The entrepreneur is praised more than the stay-at-home mom. The woman who climbs the corporate ladder is seen as more inspiring than the one who prioritizes family or creative fulfillment. Even within modern feminism, there's an invisible hierarchy of choices, and that hierarchy often mirrors the same performance metrics that men have been measured by for decades. We've changed the players, but not the game, and when women choose a different rhythm, when they opt out of the hustle, when they prioritize caregiving, when they choose peace over power, they're often met not with admiration, but with subtle disapproval, as if they've missed the point of progress. But what if progress isn't about everyone running the same race, but about each person choosing their own course in their own time? Some of the strongest women are not the loudest. They are not the most public. They're not the ones who are on magazine covers or at the head of boardrooms. Sometimes strength looks like saying no to something everyone else says you should want. Sometimes it looks like slowing down when the world tells you to speed up. And sometimes it looks like choosing joy over recognition. But we live in a culture that equates visibility with value. And because of that, many women feel unseen. Not because they're not contributing, but because they're not performing the kind of success the culture has chosen to spotlight. We tell women they're free, but only as long as their freedom doesn't make us uncomfortable. We celebrate their voice until it says something we don't want to hear. We applaud their choices until those choices diverge from the script we've written for what empowerment is supposed to look like. Freedom without judgment means honoring the full range of what a woman might choose. It means recognizing that ambition doesn't always look like climbing higher. Sometimes it looks like rooting deeper. Sometimes it looks like leaving a high-paying job to become a teacher. Sometimes it means turning down a promotion because your mental health matters more than a title. Sometimes it means choosing motherhood without career, or career without motherhood, or a blend of both that defies clean categories. The real win isn't in women becoming versions of success defined by someone else. It's in them defining it for themselves, even if that definition doesn't earn applause or validation, even if it's quiet, even if it's countercultural. And this shift doesn't just serve women, it benefits everyone. When we stop judging people's worth by how much they produce, how far they've risen, or how well they've played the game, we create space for real humanity to show up. We allow people to be whole, not just high-achieving. We stop seeing caretaking as lesser than money-making. We stop seeing rest as laziness. We stop seeing gentleness as weakness. And we start to understand that the strength of a society isn't just in its output, but in the well-being of the people living in it. And women who have so often been asked to carry both public and private burdens silently deserve that space to breathe. They deserve to not have to explain themselves. They deserve to not feel like they're letting someone down for choosing a life that doesn't match someone else's expectations. For generations, women fought for the right to vote, to work, to speak, to be educated, to be heard. These were essential battles, and they're not over. But as we continue the fight for equity, we must also protect the subtler, quieter freedom, the freedom to live life on your own terms. Not because it looks good on a resume, not because it makes a good Instagram caption, but because it's true to you. Real empowerment is not about pushing every woman to do more. It's about creating a culture where she can choose to do less, if that's what her soul needs, and know that she's still worthy, still strong, and still enough.